Peter had always been a man of ambition. Born and raised in the village, he had clawed his way up to a well-paying job in the city. His success was the pride of his aging parents, and as tradition dictated, it was time for him to take a wife. He didn't want a city girl. No, he wanted a homely, well-mannered woman who would respect him and take care of his home. That was why he returned to the village when it was time to get married. It didn't take long for him to find Tolu. She was everything a man could want: beautiful, gentle, respectful, and skilled in all things that made a wife valuable. She came from a good family, known for their humility and strong morals. Peter didn't waste time. He paid her bride price and took her as his wife. The entire village celebrated the union with great joy. The elders blessed the marriage, and Tolu's parents sent her off with pride, confident that their daughter had married well. When they arrived in the city, Tolu was filled with excitement. It was her first time being away from the village, and everything about the city fascinated her. The tall buildings, the bright lights, the noise, and the fast-moving life. She was eager to begin her new life as a wife and to build a happy home with Peter. But it didn't take long for her excitement to wane. Peter was not the husband she had expected. From the moment they settled in, he was distant. He didn't spend time with her. He barely spoke to her unless necessary. At first, she thought he was just adjusting to the idea of marriage, that he needed time to get used to having her around. She told herself to be patient. She made sure the house was always clean. She cooked delicious meals. She waited for him eagerly every evening, hoping he would come home early and sit with her, talk with her, laugh with her. But every night, Peter came home late, tired, and barely acknowledged her presence. At first, she convinced herself that maybe he was just too busy with work. But then she noticed something odd. Whenever she tried to be affectionate, he would pull away. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he would find an excuse. Either he was too tired, too stressed, or not in the mood. But whenever he wanted, he would come to her. It was confusing and painful, but Tolu said nothing. She didn't want to be a nagging wife. She kept her pain inside and continued to be a good wife, hoping that one day things would change. Months passed. Nothing changed. Peter remained distant. He provided for the house, gave her money when she needed it, but that was the extent of his husbandly duties. The intimacy between them became one-sided. If she wanted to be with him, he refused. But when he wanted, she had no choice but to accept. She lay beside him every night, feeling like a stranger in her own marriage. She was lonely. She wanted to talk to someone. But who could she tell? Her parents had been so proud of her marriage. How could she go back and tell them that she was unhappy? The villagers had celebrated her as a lucky woman. How could she admit that her husband barely treated her like a wife? So she carried her pain in silence. One day, she gathered the courage to ask Peter about it. "Peter, have I done something wrong?" she asked one evening, as they sat at the dining table. He barely looked up from his food. "What do you mean?" "You are not the way a husband should be with his wife. You don't talk to me. You don't spend time with me. You don't—" She hesitated, her voice small. "You don't touch me unless it suits you. Am I not your wife?" Peter sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Tolu, stop overthinking things. I married you, didn't I? I take care of you, don't I? What more do you want?" "I want a husband who loves me." Peter looked at her with an unreadable expression. "Love? Who told you marriage is about love?" Tolu felt like she had been slapped. He stood up from the table and walked away, leaving her sitting there, staring at her untouched food with tears in her eyes. Time passed. Tolu stopped trying to make Peter love her. She stopped waiting for him at night. She stopped trying to initiate affection. She simply did what was expected of her, kept the house in order, cooked, and remained silent. People in the neighborhood admired her. They thought she had a perfect marriage. "Peter is such a good husband," the landlord's wife would say. "You're lucky, Tolu. Not all men provide like he does." Tolu would smile, but inside, she felt empty. She envied the other women she saw, walking with their husbands, laughing, holding hands. She envied the way her neighbors' husbands kissed their wives on the forehead before leaving for work. She envied the way they looked at each other with love. Peter never looked at her that way. She wasn't sure he ever had. One night, as she lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling while he slept soundly, she whispered to herself, "Is this all my life will be?" It was on a Saturday afternoon when Tolu's world changed. She had gone to the market to buy food for the house. When she returned, she found Peter in the living room. He was dressed in nice clothes, his hair freshly cut. He smelled of expensive cologne. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked. He barely looked at her as he picked up his car keys. "I have a meeting." Tolu frowned. "On a Saturday? It's important." "Can I come with you?" she asked suddenly. Peter turned to look at her, his eyes sharp. "Why would you come with me?" "I just want to spend some time with you," she said softly. "You are always busy." Peter let out a frustrated sigh. "Tolu, I don't have time for this. Stay at home." And with that, he walked out. But something didn't feel right. Something told her that this meeting wasn't work-related. For the first time, she decided to follow him. She quickly changed into something simple and left the house. She took a taxi, instructing the driver to follow Peter's car. Her heart pounded as she watched his car weave through the city streets. Then she saw where he stopped. A fancy restaurant. A few minutes later, a woman appeared and walked toward his car. She was beautiful, dressed elegantly. She leaned into the window and kissed Peter on the cheek before getting into the passenger seat. Tolu felt her world shatter. Her husband was having an affair. Tolu waited all night for Peter to return. When he finally walked through the door, it was past midnight. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and the scent of a woman's perfume clung to him. He didn't seem surprised to see her still awake, sitting in the living room with her hands folded on her lap. He only sighed, as if already exhausted by whatever she was about to say. "I saw you," she said softly. Peter frowned, his hands still in his pockets. "Saw me where?" "At the restaurant, with the woman." The room fell silent. Peter's expression shifted from surprise to anger almost instantly. "Did you follow me?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet of the house like a blade. Tolu inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. "Peter, that's not the point. I'm telling you that I saw you with another woman. I saw you kissing her. And all you have to say is, 'Did I follow you?'" She shook her head in disbelief. "Is that all you have to say? You won't even explain who she is?" Peter's jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Instead of answering her question, he raised his voice. "A wife's place is in the home, Tolu, not roaming around the city like some detective. What kind of woman follows her husband around? Is that the kind of wife you want to be?" Tolu remained seated, her voice low, calm. She just wanted to understand. "I'm not trying to fight you, Peter. I just want to understand. Why are you seeing another woman?" "You are supposed to take care of this house," Peter roared, his face dark with anger. "You are supposed to be a respectful, submissive wife. And this is not how a respectful wife behaves." Tolu flinched slightly at the force of his voice, but she didn't yell back. She didn't argue. She didn't even cry. She just sat there, watching him as he stood there, seething, refusing to answer her. He was so angry, so defensive, yet he never once denied what she saw, never once tried to explain. She knew then. He didn't even care enough to lie. Peter stormed out of the house without another word, slamming the door behind him so hard the walls shook. The sound echoed in the silence that followed, but Tolu didn't move. She sat there for a long time, staring at the door, listening to the quiet. Something inside her broke that night. She could have gone back to the village and told her parents. Her mother would have held her and told her it was okay to leave. Her father would have been heartbroken to know their daughter was being mistreated, but she couldn't. She couldn't bear the shame of them knowing. They had been so proud of her marriage. They had prayed for her happiness, celebrated her union with Peter as a blessing. If she told them the truth, she would be taking that joy away from them. So she made a decision. She would say nothing. From that day forward, she never asked Peter where he was going. She never waited for him at night. She never asked why he came home late, why sometimes he didn't come home at all. She never asked about the perfume on his shirts, the lipstick stains that sometimes appeared on his collar. She simply endured. She continued cooking his meals. She washed his clothes. She kept the house clean. When he was home, she was quiet. If he looked at her, she looked away. If he spoke to her, she answered only what was necessary. If he wanted nothing to do with her, she wanted nothing to do with him. She became invisible in her own home. Peter noticed the change, but he never said anything. Perhaps he was relieved that she had stopped asking questions. Perhaps he thought her silence meant she had accepted her place. He carried on as if nothing had happened, as if he had not shattered his wife's heart that night. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Peter barely touched her. Tolu realized that night at the restaurant had changed everything. Before, he at least came to her when he wanted to be intimate, when it suited him. But now, he didn't even do that. He acted as if she had betrayed him, as if she was the one who had wronged him, as if she was the one who had broken their marriage. But she said nothing. Even when he ignored her completely, she said nothing. Even when he came home at dawn, reeking of alcohol and another woman's perfume, she said nothing. And Peter? Peter continued living his life as if he didn't have a wife waiting at home. One evening, as Tolu was setting the table for dinner, she heard the front door open. She expected Peter to walk in alone, as he always did. Late, distant, indifferent. But this time, something was different. She turned her head just in time to see Peter stepping into the house with another woman. Tolu froze. The woman was beautiful, elegantly dressed, and carried herself with an air of confidence. She clung to Peter's arm as if she belonged there, as if she was the woman of the house. Peter didn't even hesitate. He walked straight in, leading the woman toward the bedroom. Their bedroom. Tolu's hands trembled as she set down the last plate. Her mind struggled to process what she had just witnessed. Had he really brought another woman into their home? Into the house she had kept clean? The house where she had suffered in silence for months? She wanted to scream, to throw something, to cry. But she did nothing. She just stood there, motionless, as Peter disappeared into the bedroom with the woman. Minutes passed. Then Peter reappeared, walking back into the living room. Alone. "Tolu!" he said, his voice calm, as if nothing had happened. "Take your things to the guest room." Tolu blinked, trying to understand. "What?" "Take your belongings to the guest room," he repeated, his tone firm. She stared at him, stunned. "Why would you want me to go to the guest room?" Peter sighed impatiently, as if her question was an inconvenience. "Because this is the way things will be from now on." Her heart pounded against her ribs. "Peter, you married me. How can you disrespect me like this?" "You can either move to the guest room or leave," he said coldly. "It's your choice." Tolu's lips trembled. "If you don't want me, if you don't love me, why don't you just send me back to my family? Why are you keeping me here and treating me like this?" Peter shrugged. "If you want to leave, leave. I won't stop you. But if you stay, you will do as I say." Tolu swallowed hard, feeling the sharp sting of humiliation settle deep within her bones. She had always known Peter didn't love her, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. She wanted to protest, to fight for her dignity, but the look in Peter's eyes told her it would be useless. He had already decided. She was no longer his wife in his eyes. She was just someone who lived in his house, someone who existed in the background. Tolu turned away slowly, her feet heavy with defeat. She walked to their bedroom, not because she agreed, not because she had accepted this fate, but because she knew that arguing with Peter would do nothing. She gathered her belongings in silence. She moved into the guest room. She continued to endure. The next morning, when she woke up in the unfamiliar bed, reality crashed down on her. She was no longer Peter's wife, at least not in any meaningful way. She had become something else entirely, a maid in her own home. And if that wasn't humiliating enough, Peter's mistress, Linda, made sure she felt like one. Linda started giving her orders. Tolu, the bathroom is dirty, clean it. The kitchen is a mess, wash the dishes. Peter's clothes need ironing, make sure you don't burn them. At first, Tolu ignored her. She wasn't a maid. She wasn't going to take orders from Peter's mistress. But whenever she hesitated, Peter stepped in. Do as she says, he would tell her. And if she refused, Peter would get mad. So, Tolu learned to obey. She washed their dishes, she cleaned their bedroom, she cooked their meals. She ironed Peter's clothes while his mistress sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone. Tolu worked in silence. She did everything that was expected of her, even though every second of it crushed her spirit. She became a ghost in the house she once dreamed of calling home. She thought about leaving. Many times, she thought about packing her things and walking out of that door. But every time she imagined her parents' faces, the joy they had when she married Peter, she stopped herself. They had believed in this marriage. She couldn't break their hearts. So she endured. She swallowed her pride, held back her tears, and continued to live in a house where she was no longer wanted. But deep inside, something had shifted. She was no longer the naive village girl who had arrived in the city filled with hope. She had seen the worst of Peter, and she had accepted one truth. She was alone in this marriage, but that didn't mean she had to remain powerless. She started paying attention. Peter never considered her to be intelligent. He thought of her as just a simple village girl with no education, no ambition, and no ability to understand the complexity of his business. That was his biggest mistake. Every morning, as she cleaned the bedroom, she took note of everything. The documents on his table, the emails he left open on his laptop, the conversations he had on the phone when he thought she wasn't listening. She learned about the company he was building from scratch, how it was growing faster than he expected. She learned that Peter had resigned from his job to focus solely on his business, confident that it was successful enough to sustain him. And then, she discovered something that shook her to the core. Peter had just bought a new house. Not just any house, a luxurious, fully furnished home in an upscale neighborhood. A house meant for him and Linda. Tolu's hands trembled when she first realized the full extent of Peter's betrayal. He had never intended for her to be part of his future. All along, she had just been a temporary placeholder, a wife for appearances, while he built a new life with Linda. But instead of breaking down, she smiled to herself. He thought she was just a housewife. He thought she had no intelligence, no wit, no strength. He would soon learn how wrong he was. Tolu had a cousin, Kobe, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. He was a lawyer, one of the brightest minds in their village, who had moved to the city long before her. She had lost contact with him after her marriage, too ashamed to tell him about the life she was living. But now, she needed him. When Peter and Linda were away one afternoon, she stepped out and went to find Kobe. Tolu? He was surprised when he saw her. It's been years. How are you? How's your husband? She forced a smile. I need your help, cousin, and I need you to keep this confidential. His eyes darkened with concern, but he nodded. Tell me everything. She carefully explained her situation, leaving out no details. Kobe listened in silence, and when she finished, he leaned forward. Are you saying you have access to all his business documents? Yes, she said. I know where he keeps everything. I know who he deals with. I know where his money is. And I know that he just bought a house for himself and another woman. Kobe tapped his fingers against the table, deep in thought. He has made a big mistake underestimating you. If you're patient and careful, we can make sure that when he throws you away, he's the one left with nothing. Tolu felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Tell me what to do. Over the next few weeks, Tolu followed Kobe's guidance carefully. She learned about company ownership, about the importance of signing rights, about how properties and businesses could be transferred legally. She started taking pictures of important documents while cleaning, carefully storing the evidence. She memorized names of key business partners, financial advisors, and lawyers. She was no longer just enduring, she was preparing. Peter had no idea. He was so focused on his new life with Linda that he never noticed how quiet Tolu had become. How calculating! Once the house was fully furnished, Peter announced that it was time to move. Tolu packed her things silently, knowing that whatever lay ahead would not be in her favor. She had learned to expect the worst from Peter. They moved into the luxurious house together. Peter, Linda, and Tolu. It was surreal. Tolu, the legal wife, was made to live in the same house with her husband's mistress, treated like an unwanted guest in a place where she should have been the queen. But she said nothing. She continued her quiet servitude, watching, listening, waiting. The first few days in the new house were uneventful. Tolu did what she always did. She cooked, cleaned, and took care of Peter's clothes. Linda, on the other hand, acted as if she was the true wife, issuing orders, rearranging furniture, and treating Tolu like a servant. And then, one evening, Peter made his final move. He called Tolu to the living room. Linda was sitting comfortably beside him, her arms wrapped around his as they lounged on the expensive couch. "Tolu," Peter said, "I think it's time." Tolu looked at him, confused. "Time for what?" Peter smirked. "Time for you to go back to the village." Her heart pounded, but she remained still. "Why?" Peter sighed, as if she was a burden he had been waiting to get rid of. "I don't need your services anymore. What you've been doing, I can hire a maid for that." Tolu felt a sharp pain in her chest. "So that's it? You only married me because you needed someone to take care of your house while you built a new life with Linda." Peter laughed cruelly. "Come on, Tolu. You're not stupid. You knew what this was. Now I have Linda. She will be my wife, and we will get a maid to do everything you did. You can go now. I don't need you anymore." Tolu clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "You can't just throw me out like that, Peter." "You married me." Peter rolled his eyes and leaned forward, mocking her with his tone. "You have no dignity, Tolu. You know I don't love you, but you're still here. I married you, but you became a maid in my house, in your own husband's house. And still, you want to stay? I'm telling you to go. I'm freeing you, and you look like you don't want to go." Tolu chuckled, a low, knowing laugh that made Peter frown. "Is this what you really want to do?" she asked. Peter smirked. "Yes. I don't love you. I love Linda. And now I want you to leave my house." Tolu crossed her arms. "Then you have to leave my house first." Peter blinked. "What?" "You and your mistress have to leave my house." Peter laughed, shaking his head. "What are you talking about?" Tolu tilted her head slightly. "Peter, this house belongs to me. I own it." The laughter on Peter's face faded. His body tensed. "What nonsense are you saying?" Linda scoffed. "Is she mad?" Tolu remained calm, her voice steady. "While you were busy playing house with Linda, I was making moves of my own. I found the property documents. I saw that the house was still open for registration, so I made sure that I signed it first." Peter's face darkened. "That's a lie." Tolu shrugged. "Go check." Peter stormed into his office. Linda followed close behind, confusion written all over her face. He yanked open the drawer, where he kept all his important documents, and grabbed the property deed. He flipped through the pages, scanning for his name. It wasn't there. Instead, in clear, bold letters, the legal owner of the house was written as Tolu Olanrawaju. Peter's hands trembled. His breathing became shallow. Linda leaned over his shoulder, reading the document. Her eyes widened in horror. "Peter, is this true? Does she own this house?" Peter swallowed hard. "Yes." Linda took a step back, her face twisting in disgust. Tolu stood at the doorway, watching them. "That's not all," she said smoothly. Peter turned around, his rage barely contained. "What do you mean?" Tolu smiled. "You're fired, Peter." Peter frowned. "What?" "You no longer own your company," she said. "It's mine now." Peter stared at Tolu in disbelief, his entire body shaking. You're lying, he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. You can't own my company. It's mine. I built it from nothing. Tolu chuckled. No, you didn't. Peter frowned, confusion settling over his features. You were never the sole owner, Peter, Tolu continued. You had a business partner, Emika. At the mention of the name, Peter's face paled. You remember Emika, right? She asked, tilting her head slightly. Your trusted partner? The one you cheated out of his rightful share when you saw that the company was growing? The one you manipulated into signing documents that stripped him of power while keeping him around as a worker? The one who put in the same effort, the same hours, the same work. But you took all the credit? Peter's throat went dry. What? What does Emika have to do with this? Tolu smirked. Everything. She leaned forward, watching as Peter's face contorted in fear. You see, Peter, I wasn't the only one you betrayed. Emika knew exactly the kind of man you were. He saw what you were doing to me. He saw how you treated me like a maid, how you humiliated me, how you replaced me with Linda while I was still living under your roof. Peter's hands clenched into fists. That's none of his business. It became his business the day I reached out to him, Tolu said. You underestimated me, Peter. You thought I was just a foolish village girl, incapable of understanding anything. But while you were busy living your double life, I was learning. I was watching. And when I found out how you cheated Emika, I knew exactly who to turn to. Peter shook his head violently. No, no, Emika wouldn't. He wouldn't help you. Tolu smiled. Oh, but he did, and he was very willing to help. Peter felt the blood drain from his face. He told me everything, Peter. How you tricked him into believing he still had a future in the company when you had already cut him out. How you used his hard work to grow the business, while making sure he remained just a partner, in name only. You used him just like you used me. Peter's breathing turned erratic. This is not possible. This is not possible. It is, Tolu said calmly, because Emeka never left. You still kept him working under you, thinking he was powerless, thinking he had no way to fight back. But Emeka knew everything about the company, every detail, every deal, every weakness. And when I showed him the documents I had, he knew exactly how to help me take it away from you. Peter was shaking now. His knees buckled, and he stumbled backward, gripping the couch for support. You stole my company, he muttered. Tolu laughed lightly. No, Peter. You stole the company, from Emeka. I just helped him get justice. Peter let out a strangled breath. No, no. Tolu straightened. So you see, Peter, it wasn't just me who wanted you to lose. It was Emeka too. He saw an opportunity to finally get back what you took from him, and we worked together to make sure you never got it back. Peter's entire body trembled. This isn't real. This isn't real. Oh, it's very real, Peter, Tolu said coldly. And now you? You have nothing. No company, no job, no house. Peter looked around frantically, as if trying to find something, anything, to prove that this was a nightmare, that he would wake up and everything would still be his. But it was real. The documents were real. Peter stood frozen, his world crumbling around him. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. Tolu owned everything, his company, his house, his life. His hands trembled as he tried to process it all. His mind raced, searching for a way to fight back, a way to undo what had just happened. But there was no way out. He had been completely outplayed. And then, amidst the silence, Linda suddenly turned on her heels and walked straight into the bedroom. Peter's heart dropped. Linda? He called after her. She didn't respond. A few minutes later, she reappeared, this time with her suitcase in hand. I'm leaving, she said simply. Peter's stomach twisted. His chest tightened with panic. Leaving for where? His voice cracked. You can't leave me. Linda scoffed as she adjusted the strap of her handbag over her shoulder. What exactly am I staying for, Peter? Peter took a desperate step toward her. Linda, we'll figure it out. We'll fix this. She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. There's nothing to fix. You have nothing, Peter. No house, no company, no money. And I'm not about to stand here and struggle with you. Peter felt like he was drowning. No, Linda, you can't do this to me. I love you. Linda turned to look at him, her face filled with disappointment. Love? She let out a humorless chuckle. Love won't take care of me. Love won't pay the bills. Love won't put food on the table. She sighed and picked up her suitcase. You don't have anything to take care of me, Peter, and I refuse to suffer because of your foolishness. Peter felt his knees weaken. Linda, please. His voice was barely a whisper, but she didn't even look at him as she turned and walked out the door, slamming it shut behind her. Peter stood there, staring at the empty doorway, his hands shaking. He had lost everything. Tolu watched him in silence. The once proud, arrogant man, who had treated her like a servant in her own marriage, was now a broken shell. He had played her, betrayed her, humiliated her. He had thrown her aside as if she was worthless. But now he was the one left with nothing. Peter turned to Tolu, his eyes desperate, his lips trembling. Tolu? His voice cracked as he fell to his knees. Please, I was wrong. I made a mistake. Tolu took a deep breath, staring down at the man who had humiliated her, mistreated her, and discarded her like garbage. You treated me like nothing, she said softly. But now, you are the one with nothing. Peter sobbed, clutching her feet. Tolu, please, I can change. I'll be better. Tolu pulled her foot away and took a step back. I want you out of my house. Peter let out a shaky breath. He wanted to fight back. He wanted to scream. But there was nothing left to fight for. Tolu turned, walking to the living room. She picked up her cup of tea, took a sip, and smiled. Peter was ruined, and justice had been served. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please like, comment, and share the video. Also, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you won't miss our next video. Bye!